Ten is back with the P1 Max, aka the Pandas, and there has been a lot of these same planar tunings recently, you know, the T10, the F1 Pros, the Planar. So I'm happy to announce that the P1 Max 2 is slightly different than the other ones. In terms of the overall sound, the P1 Max 2 follows a balanced sound signature, very familiar from its low end up to the 2K, 3K area, but the main difference occurs from 5 to 8K, where the other planars have a more energetic upper mids presentation, and where a lot of the sizzle and sharpness normally exists. The Pandas instead tames the upper mids, making the overall playback smoother, less fatiguing, and instead shifts the boost to the upper air region, giving that splashy feeling to the cymbals without the extra harshness from the upper mid. This makes the Panda synergize really well with other energetic genres like K-pop, J-pop, EDM, where most of the sharpness occurs in the 5 to 8K. And because the Pandas tame this region, it also helps balance out the extra fatigue that often happens on tracks like Butterfly by Luna and Say It by Yorushika, where the production is like a little bit over boosted in the upper mids. Low end wise, the texture is solid. It's nothing crazy, not the most tactile, impactful, or like heavy and full sounding, but it's clean, well controlled, doesn't get in the way, and it's enough to not be anemic. There's enough mid bass where, you know, the drums, bass guitars, male vocals don't sound overly thin and super unnatural. Now the timbre on the Pandas are actually pretty decent, not much of that planar sizzliness or that, you know, sharp metallic feeling. The Noe is also good, it's not super light and like floats off. And as an all-rounder, this is my favorite planar, mainly because of the cut in the 5 to 8K region. It really saves my ears for a lot of the songs, because a lot of the other planars are just a little bit too much in that region, like the T10s, the S12s, the Clanars, stuff like that. Overall, there's a nice balance between the treble, the low end, and the vocals without any region really jumping out too much or, you know, overemphasizing certain elements. The gain in the 2 to 3K area from the vocals is enough. It's not over shouty because of the tamer upper mids, and, you know, there's enough openness and extension to the end notes, making it not feel blunted like the Dusk, for example. Now the P1 Max 2 isn't as quote-unquote special and, you know, mid-centric as the original P1 Max before it got silently retuned and killed off. The OG pre-retuned Pandas scale much better. They're more immersive with a very like forward mid-range, but this also means because the original Pandas have more of that, you know, special sauce in the mids, as a result of, you know, focusing more on a specific frequency range, the originals aren't as flexible and versatile as the P1 Max 2 when it comes to just like hitting shuffle on your entire library, because the vocals are more pushed back to make more room for other instruments, giving you that more like mid-range instrument focus. Likewise, the retuned version of the original P1 Max actually sounds very similar to the P1 Max 2, but it's just not as refined and a little bit sharper in the treble, not as smooth. Technical performance wise, they're both pretty much similar. They're around the same, and in my opinion, if you already have the, you know, retuned original version, then you don't really need the P1 Max 2. And also, you can still get the original Panda sound by placing a 300 mesh filter on the retuned P1 Max and a 400 or 500 mesh filter on the P1 Max 2. It's really going to help tame that, you know, 2 to 3K region and bring back that original mid-centric sound. But overall though, the P1 Max 2 is just a very solid all-rounder, and especially if you listen to a lot of like energetic tracks like J-pop, K-pop, tuning wise, these are pretty good. Like for example, the Dusk is pretty good for J-pop and K-pop, but the Pandas actually sound more complete in the vocals than the Dusk, mainly because of that 2K boost followed by the cut at 5K, you know, 8K. Now this works because when it comes to fully extend the vocals, you can either have a gradual gain from 2 to 8K like Harmon, or an early rise followed by a cut in the upper mids like the Pandas, so things don't become like over fatiguing, because, you know, you are pushing the vocals more forward. However, it's not recommended to have both, or in other words, there shouldn't be an earlier rise followed by, you know, more upper mids afterwards, since that will sound too fatiguing and too forward because the vocals are pushed more forward. And likewise, if you do have a Harmon gain but you don't follow through until like the 6 to 8K, then you lack the final extension on the vocals like the Dusk. So for what the Dusk is trying to do, which is being an all-rounder that's mainly good for pop, J-pop, K-pop, the Pandas actually does this type of sound better because of the better vocals while maintaining a smooth and balanced playback, and it also costs 2 times less. But before we move on, you guys know the drill. This video is sponsored by you guys. I buy most of my IEMs to review in order to try and stay unbiased as possible, but I don't have a unlimited money glitch. I wish I did, so I do need your support. You can help me out by becoming a channel member. It's only $5 a month, and we do regular giveaways there. But aside from that, back to the video. The only real weakness of the P1 Max 2 is probably the low end, but even then, it's not really a weakness. Like the bass is still solid. It's not light or pillowy. It has good note weight, but it's just just not as textured and impactful as something like the Hype 4, where like you really feel the air and the bass slamming. Now resolution and detail wise, the DUSK is still better, but the PANDAS aren't too far behind since it is planar after all, and at more than half the price of the DUSK. As an all-rounder, I would pick the PANDAS and then just save up for a sound that's more unique. There are a lot of different like Sci-Fi stuff out there, so just like look around, because I wouldn't spend like $360 for an all-rounder. Now as for some other comparisons versus the Nova, my preference is still the P1 Max 2. It's not as shouty in the upper mids with certain tracks because of like the TIMBRE 5 to 8K, but the Nova does feel more complete and correct because it does fill in that region at the cost of like scaling and, you know, some shout at higher volumes. Tech wise, I would give the slight edge to the Nova because it does sound a bit sharper, a little bit cleaner, more like complete, you know, more sub-bass rumble, while the low end texture wise, they're both around the same. But the main difference is that the P1 Max is a lot smoother, slightly warm, you know, all-rounder, whereas the Nova is, well, you know, it's Harman 2019, so it's going to be cleaner and more balanced. Versus the CKLVX or the Pula, the CKLVX is going to sound airier, and the vocal and the low end feels fuller and less light compared to the P1 Max 2. It's not as clean as the Panda since the mid bass does bloom out more on the CKLVX, but it doesn't like bleed per se, it doesn't like get in the way. It just gives the vocals a heavier no way, which I actually like. I personally still like the CKLVX better. It's probably still my favorite under $200. The timbre sounds more natural, it's not as light, it's fuller, and the scale's like a lot better, very good with certain tracks, and it gives you that like dreamy, airy, but still full sound that you just don't get with the Pandas. And a quick comparison of the CKLVX and the DUSK, because I didn't get to do that in my DUSK review, but basically the CKLVX is a fuller, airier version of the DUSK. The vocals also feel better extended because of the extra air. Like again, similar to the Pandas, if you're going to have a cut in the upper mids, you either need way more triple air afterwards for the end transients like the CKLVX, or else the vocals don't feel finished because you blunted the extension. Or you can have an earlier rise like the Pandas, but either way you still need that extension somewhere on the FR, because you can't just have neither if you're going for an upper mids cut, right? That just make the vocals sound boring, flat, and blunted like the DUSK. Now technical performance wise, the DUSK is going to be better there. The transients are sharper and more resolving. It's not as smooth and airy, it's more like sharp, right? But tonality wise, the CKLVX is just much better in my opinion. It's more unique and a lot more enjoyable. But that tangent aside, if you're looking for an all-rounder, either the P1 Max 2 or the Nova would be the better buy in my opinion over some of the more expensive stuff like the DUSK. I would just skip the $300 range if you want like an all-rounder set, because it's kind of a waste of money in my opinion. So unless you're looking for unique tuning, you should just like save up and buy something else that specializes in like a different sound profile. But on the other hand, if you care more about the technical aspects, you know, then the other planars like the T10, the Planar, the F1 Pro are still going to be good. They're probably better value wise because they're cheaper and they have very similar technical performance, just not as smooth and, you know, sharper and more unnatural compared to the Pandas. But yeah, unfortunately the Pandas are more like mainstream now. It doesn't have that unique flavor in the midst of them anymore, but you can still kind of get that with the mesh filters, so that not completely gone, right? But that aside, I hope this review was helpful. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see everyone in the next one. Shout out to Jeff Young, RoarX Cat, Dom Q, Star Buccaneers, Joel Pink, Discall Scaldus, B_Urac, Mystic Spoon Attack, Oh Really, Walker Standard, User, Ernest, Contain Guava Juice Gain, Patrick, Bell Cell Kel, Rosa the Kelf, Perry Jat, Polly, Mr. Gorillas, Anto Risto, Gis Seng Young, Tomat Pafrache, Ed, Harry, Christopher, Federico, Name, and Henry. Thank you guys so much for the support.